Previously on Maplestory the novel, Sacred Tears. His screams were soon rested, wrapped in a warm blanket, and brought to his exhausted mother and proud father.
I wonder what kind of man he will grow up to be.
I am a Tatsumari of Minerna, and should be shown the respect as such, as I am the voice of the Great Mother herself.
And now the continuation of Episode 1, Part 2. Adelia walked to the far side of her father's study, looking over the railing into Aswan below, a large city carved into the rock below the sand. Its entrance was marked only by a massive black obelisk and palace-like building among the endless waves of sand. Maxis and Dane sat near her father Vusron's desk, opposite the railing where scrolls and tomes lay scattered.
And you're sure that nothing like this has happened before?
Vusron asked, holding his chin as he searched through a scroll before tossing it aside and picking up a nearby tome.
Yes, I am quite sure,
Adelia responded, watching as one of the many shamans and their apprentices walked through the city below. Sighing heavily, Vusron closed the tome and set it aside on his desk.
I don't know what to tell you, Adelia. From what you've told me, you merely had a dream on your way to Ariant. If anything, it could be you inherited the gift of sight from...
Vusron stopped himself and looked up to Adelia as she now stared longingly at a painting of her mother hanging on the wall. A proud but beautiful woman with cascades of light brown hair. Maxis looked up and noticed the hurt in Adelia's eyes and the distance in Vusron's.
I'm sorry, I didn't...
I know, Father,
Adelia replied, folding her arms and hugging herself.
Whatever happens, you and Maxis are always welcome here in Aswan,
Vusron said, walking over to Adelia and placing a hand on her shoulder while speaking low to her.
Always remember that you do not have to be bound by your heritage.
Vusron comforted, both of them hugging each other before the small family left through the main gate, escorted by 2 large guards until they were on their way in the sand sailor. As they were going, Maxis heard one of the guards scoff loudly. Finally! I was beginning to wonder when that traitor's daughter would leave. Maxis looked back to Adelia, wondering if she had heard, only to see that she bowed her head, trying to keep a single tear from falling. Why would you let them talk to you like that? Maxis pressed once they had been seated and were on their way.
It has to do with my mother, but it's not something I like to talk about,
Adelia replied sharply, pulling Dane into her lap. I saw the look both you and your father had when you looked at that painting, and I know what it means. What happened?
Just leave it alone.
Adelia, the most that I know about your mother is that she died. What I saw in there means something more happened. Please, tell me. What happened to your mother? Maxis pressed. Adelia curled her lips inward, trying to keep her tears from falling as she looked up to the ceiling, battling with herself on whether or not she should tell him. She reached through the collar of her shirt and pulled from it the necklace she always wore.
My mother was a powerful grand shamaness, nearly a master. One year, the master shaman found that a surge of mana would be welling up from Eusoria. If something wasn't done, it would destabilize the power of the great obelisk. When the surge came, despite the preparations that were made, it was more powerful than predicted, and the obelisk was about to release all its power. If it did, everything within 50 miles would be destroyed. My mother decided to try and absorb some of the power to stabilize it, and in doing so, helped the other shaman to regain control. But so much power flooded into my mother that she lost herself, dying in my father's arms a short time later. Once the surge had passed, despite protests of the other shaman that had helped, the people of Aswan brought charges of treason against my mother and father. My father and I would have been banished from Aswan had he and my uncle not fought the accusations as hard as they could. Eventually, the king and the council were convinced that my mother only reacted to a dire situation, allowing us to remain in Aswan. Legally, we have been pardoned. But the people and shamans still shame her any chance they get.
Adelia looked down at Dane, noticing that his gaze was almost comforting, reaching out of his blanket for her. Maxis put his arms around her tightly while kissing her head, saying nothing as they rode the coach back to Margata. Once home, Adelia settled into her life as a mother while Maxis returned to his work as one of the lead researchers within Margata, along their brightest mind, Dr. Mathias Long. Known as a significant alchemical hub within Eusoria, Margata was home to some rather dangerous experiments between two cooperating factions. The Caldos were a group specializing in mechanical and biomechanical alchemy led by a man named Madae Sung. The Zoomist Society, as they called themselves, dedicated themselves to true alchemy, led by a wise man named Carl Jameson. This wing used nothing more than raw materials to create what they needed. Both factions had been researching the possibility of transferring a human mind into a mechanical body, spearheaded by Dr. Long.
Now tell me again, Doctor, why are we proceeding with this kind of unethical experiment?
Maxis asked, as Dr. Long looked over a report about their latest experiment of memory transfusion. I fear my wife and daughter will outlive me. As you know, my wife Felicia is of the last remaining Sylph fairies, and my daughter Kenny shares her bloodline very strongly. Because of that bloodline, I fear that I will be gone many years before they even begin to age. Dr. Long reached under his shirt and produced a locket, opening the cover and revealing a picture of two beautiful dark-haired women standing back to back. Kenny is healthy despite the odds of half-fairies often being weak. This experiment is really for me to create a body that lives as long as they do. Kenny is already into her mid-teens, and there is so much that I want to experience with them. I don't want to give that up just yet. Maxis smiled as he understood what Dr. Long meant. He wouldn't want to give up his family, not for all the miso in Eusoria. Months turned into years. Experiments for various parts of the body were performed and then added. Maxis would sometimes bring Dane to the lab where he watched in awe as chemicals would mix, elements merged, or a piece of machinery would come to life. The alchemic masters within Margata instructed Dane thoroughly. His mind absorbed everything he touched or read, excelling in every subject. His ability to learn complicated matters quickly would isolate him from people, as he became despised and idolized for both his intelligence and his snow-white hair, a point of swarm attraction among young women especially. Retreating to his room once the day had ended, Dane would pore over tomes on any number of subjects, safe and alone. He also developed a habit of addressing his parents by their first name. At first, Adelia and Maxis thought it odd that he would treat them as such, but as time passed, it became apparent that it was not out of disrespect or a feeling of superiority, but rather a quirk of his personality. Once he had finished with the schools of Margata at the tender age of 13, he set his sights to the schools of Eusoria, focusing his study into the art of magic. Again, his learning and understanding of magic were unparalleled, so much so that he even outpaced his masters within a short time. It was through this study he felt the first tinge of darkness, or rather understood what he had felt all his life. Something was wrong with the world. It was faint, but it was there. The world was warped. After studying abroad for nearly 3 years, he spent days locked in his room, reading through history books and magic tomes to find the answer to his burning question.
I'm worried about him, Maxis,
Adelia said one day, watching as Dane pored over one of his books. Maxis looked past her to Dane, furrowing his brow.
I've tried getting him to come down to the labs and help with the experiments, but he always just comes right back here. I don't know what will get him out of the house,
Maxis replied, sighing long. Adelia was about to respond to him when a knock came at the door. Carl and Madae both had come with a small folder and hopeful expressions on their faces. Are you both free? There is something that we would like to discuss, Carl asked, motioning for the two of them to come outside. Maxis grabbed a cloak for both of them as they headed out into the cooling night.
Yes? What's the matter?
Adelia asked. Being master of liquid melting, she, along with Maxis, had been granted a seat on the Alchemic Council of Margata. Madae and I are pleased with the progress your son has made in his studies under us and within his own undertakings. With careful consideration, We would like to nominate him for the position of Master Alchemist, Madae snorted, turning to Carl with disdain in his eyes.
Carl here is the one that thinks the boy should be considered. While he does show much promise, I still think that it is too early for such a responsibility to be laid before him.
Maxis held up his hands between them.
Brothers, there is no need to bicker. I agree with Madae in that such a responsibility is normally a tremendous responsibility to set on anyone, let alone a young person. But Dane is no ordinary boy, as I'm sure that you have seen.
Then you agree that his nomination would be a great thing? Carl asked eagerly. Maxis looked to Adelia for an answer, feeling that she would be able to best answer the question.
Dane has been spending a lot of time poring over books, much more than I think is healthy. Do not misunderstand me. I am proud of him for soaking up so much knowledge from our libraries and beyond. However, I believe that his obsession with researching whatever has his attention at this moment is bordering on the outrageous. Something like this, I believe, would break his endless cycle, allowing him to interact with others, furthering the advancements of alchemy here in Margata.
With her agreement for Dane's nomination, Carl and Madae left to prepare the paperwork and the eventual vote for all of Margata.